Alright, peace. Back at it again, man, with another lesson. Okay. Want to give all praises, glory, honor, and thanksgiving to Yahweh Ba'Hashem, Hamashiach Yahushai, Ba'Hashem Barak Kodash, peace and blessings to the hopeful elect. Alright. Yeah, so left off with Simeon and Levi, right? Avenging Dinah, and how that manifested into a great zeal for acquiring cattle, right? Because to this day, they had that same spirit, right? Same spirit on them that they had when they avenged Dinah, which is now being used to get cattle, right? To acquire cattle. So let's continue talking about that. All right, let's deal with, the cattle raiding among the Abakuria and the Maasai and the other tribes of Simeon and Levi, man. Okay, let's deal with that. This is the report article is called Detention Without Trial. All right. Detention without trial, deportation, and security among the Kuria of Tanzania. All right. Page 82. Okay, one of the issues recorded as threatening peace and security among the Kuria was cattle raiding. The history of cattle raiding among the Kuria has been extensively documented and discussed by various scholars. Cattle raiding among the Kuria can be divided into two major categories: non-violent and violent raiding. Non-violent raiding was done during the night when cattle were already enclosed in a cattle kraal and owners had fallen into sleep. Raiders would open the cattle kraal and go off with the cattle without being noticed until the morning, when the owner found that his cattle had been stolen. This kind of theft was predominant in pre-colonial and colonial periods and was mainly organized by Kuria warriors called Abamura. Okay, so predominantly was the night raiding, which was non-violent, right? Which existed in the pre-colonial, colonial, and colonial periods. Okay. It says, in violent raiding, raiders who were armed with military weapons ambushed cattle owners and took their cattle in broad daylight or before cattle owners had gone to bed. This kind of raiding began in the 1950s, but was more intensified in the 1980s when assault weapons such as machine guns and AK-47s began to be widely used by raiders. However, violent and non-violent raiding coexisted. So what changed, man? What changed from the raiding being non-violent to becoming extremely violent with machine guns and AKs? What happened, man? Well, let's find out. What happened took place. The reason why I went from such an extreme, from non-violent to violent to an extreme level of raiding, right, is because of this element right here. All right, the pre-colonial and colonial periods. That's what it was, man. And let's dig into that, man. Let's dig into that. What happened, man? All right. The pre-colonial period. The colonial the colonial period is when it really started to transition from non-violent to violent. You still had the cattle raiding, but it got worse when the colonization set in, like gangrene in the body. One of the members, man. Okay. Look at this right here. This is under taxation. All right. says the prime manifestation of the colonial presence in Bukuria during the early years was the sporadic collection of taxes by the chiefs. Right, so that you had the elders and spiritualists among the Abakuria, Maasai, and other tribes, right? They were collecting the taxes for the chiefs. The chiefs were collecting taxes from the people for the British. And I think the Germans too as well. Right, it says ostensibly taxation was introduced in order to meet the cost of colonial administration, but it was also used effectively to push people into wage employment. Right, they wanted to turn them into wage slaves, man. Okay, make them workers, free labor for Germans and British. Tax collection reduced the surplus generated within the Korea economy because they saying that the British saying that they have an issue with their livestock being overstocked. Like they got too much livestock. Okay. So they imposed a tax for them to reduce their surplus in cattle. Right. They forced them to sell their cattle, which we gonna see. It says tax collection reduced the surplus generated within the Korea economy, thus enabling settlers and the colonial administration to obtain labor. All right. The imposition of taxes first took the form of hut tax. You see this, man? Hut tax. Putting a tax on a hut that you did not even provide the materials to build. A damn hut tax. So you're going to put a hut tax on somebody who was already in the land before you came, impose a tax on them and make them pay the tax to meet obligations that they didn't have previously before you even showed up. You see this, man? You see this? You can imagine how this would lead to more violent, more raiding, right? More raiding. It says the imposition of taxes first took the form of hut tax, which had to be paid in cash, right? In Bukuria, as elsewhere in South Kavirondo district, hut tax was first collected in 1905. 3 rupees were charged per house. All right. And the Abakuria were forced to sell their animals to obtain such money. You see this, man? Forced to sell their animals. They could not pay the sums required at one go. They paid in installments, right? Which made them almost perpetually indebted to the chiefs. But see, the chiefs they were agents for the British, man. Right? Agents for the British. So we already seeing now the taxation, right? One of the contributing factors to more raiding, increasing the raiding, the cattle raiding among the Most High's people. It says here. Oh yeah, and I'm reading from. Let me show you, man. Let me get it, man. Agricultural history of the Abakuria. Agricultural history of the Abakuria of Kenya from the end of the 19th century to the mid 1970s. All right. Page 96. So the first task of the colonial government in Bukuria was to appoint chiefs, you see this, and headmen to help them institute a form of government they could control. All right. So they're using the chiefs, the chiefs that are the heads of the people of the Abakuria, the Maasai, okay, all the other tribes, the Bagasu, the Kissi, all of them. Okay. It says the chiefs were to become British agents, expected to facilitate economic transformation in Bukuria, right? Because they wanted to bring development in their area, so to speak, man. You know, the initial articulation of the colonial government with the Kuria indigenous society resulted in the exploitation of the latter, firstly through taxation. You see that? Exploitation through taxation. Ain't that sound familiar? All right. Taxation transformed some Abakuria into wage laborers. You see this? Wage slaves, man. Because if you impose a tax like a hut tax, what you gonna do, man? If you forced to pay that hut tax, you get exploited by having to give up some of the things that you had freely before the damn Germans and British came. All right. So it say the Abakuria turn into wage laborers, right? Taxation transformed some Abakuria into wage laborers and squatters, and also forced them to engage in unfair trade, that they sold their cattle at low prices in order to obtain cash to meet their tax obligations. So you see this will frustrate the way of life among the Abakuria and the Maasai, so they lead to more raiding. It says, secondly, the Abakuria suffered the impact of colonial rule through the policy of stock reduction, right? Where herders were forced to sell and even monetize bride price in order to reduce their herds. So what happened was they believed, the British believed, that they had too much overstock. So it led them into forcing them to sell their cattle, right? To reduce their stocks, all right, to sell it. They sold their stocks to reduce their cattle. They wanted to separate the two so they could turn them into wage laborers. It says the Abakuria suffered the impact of the colonial rule through the policy of stock reduction, where herders were forced to sell and even monetize bride price in order to reduce their herds. So they ended up lowering the bride price. Because they had a whole lot of cattle overstock and the bride prices were high. Okay. So according to that theory, the British and Germans, they believe that led to cattle raiding. Which probably did, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is now in modern times, which is caused by the colonization that came in. They just made it worse. You know what I'm saying? Consequently, these policies encourage cattle raiding between the Abakuria and their neighbors, the Maasai, right? Thus encouraging regional hostility. Regional hostility. So you see, we got a factor here playing a large part in more cattle raiding. Consequently, these policies encourage cattle raiding between the Abakuria and their neighbors, right? The taxation fueling the cattle raiding, man, brought on by the colonizers, man, right? What else happened, man? All right, we got, what else we got here? Same article, page 135. This is a major effect of the war on animal husbandry in Bukuria was the considerable loss of cattle through forced sale. You see this, man? Force them to sell their cattle so they could pay that hut tax, meet their obligation. In 1940, for example, the Abakuria complained through the local native council that their animals were being bought at very low prices. You see this, man? Because if they got overstock and high bride price, you gotta look at it like this: the high bride price, because this is their way of getting a wife, man. They don't do chagalaga like Reuben. Okay, they get their bride by getting the cattle. Okay, that's how they do things, man. Matter of fact, they got a beer party song that expresses that. Let me find that real quick, man. Okay. Okay, yeah, here is a song. This is one of the lyrics to the song. Page 43 in agricultural history. It says raiding was also offered as a means of obtaining bride wealth cattle. This demonstrated in a popular beer party song, and this is the Swahili right here, and it translates into, "You who long for a woman, make more cows. It is women who will remove your desire." See this, man? So this is how they get their wives, man. Okay? This is how they get their women, man. By herding, by getting their cattle, man. Whether any means necessary. Doing cattle raids and paying for it, whatever, man. Alright? Alright, back to the same article, Agricultural History, page 135. A major effect of the war on animal husbandry in Bukuria was the considerable loss of cattle through forced sale. In 1940, for example, the Abakuria complained through the local native council that the animals were being bought at a very low price, man. Low price. So they had a high bride price and an overstock of cattle, so that led to raiding. But you got to look at the bride price. It's like a dam, you know. The higher the bride price, the higher and wider the dam is, which means it can hold back more water. And the water is like the cattle. So the higher the bride price, the more cattle that they gonna end up possessing, because ain't nobody able really to meet that bride price, which that led to the cattle raiding sometimes. But here the Germans and British come in, they cause things to be worse, man, because they interfering with a lifestyle that they've been doing before pre-colonialization, man. So now they gotta adapt and adjust to this middleman that is now present in their land, making things worse. So you got the very low prices. So cattle is just being, they losing their stocks basically. It says without using force, however, the district's annual quota during the war could not have been met since prices paid by livestock control were too low. In fact, in the same year, the district had failed to produce the number of cattle ordered. Added to ruthless taxation, this pressure considerably reduced the cattle population in Bukuria. Okay? See this, man? And now you got another contributing factor is the disease and pestilence that spread among the cattle. That led to raiding as well. It says here in 1941, rinderpest broke out in South Kavirondo. The disease reached Bukuria in October the same year, and in the space of a few devastating months, the disease destroyed a lot of the Kuria cattle. The Abakuria attempted to recoup their losses by intensifying raiding, but they found the neighboring communities as badly hit as they were. Okay? So we got taxation, right? We got diseases and pestilence. We got the occupation of colonizers in the land, influencing more cattle raiding, man. Right? All right, more cattle raiding, man. Let's continue, though. Let's continue. All right, hold on. All right, I'm still dealing with more taxing, man. All of that. All right. All right, page 77, agricultural history. It says the British administration considered courier cattle a main hindrance to the successful implementation of their policies. Right. Not only were the apocoria at certain periods held to possess too many herds of cattle, right? Because like I said, they think they had too much. So they also devoted extensive time and efforts to cattle-oriented activities. So these people love to be around their cattle, man. Right? Like what it's saying in Genesis, man. They was already in the field with the cattle before they heard the news of Dinah. So yeah, Genesis 34 verse 5, it says, and Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter. Now his sons were with his cattle in the field. Right? And Jacob held his peace until they were come. So they was already in the field with the cattle, man, before they had heard the news. Right? Already in the field, man. This is why they say they devote too much time and activities with their cattle, man. Says not only were the apocoria at certain periods held to possess too many herds of cattle, they also devoted extensive time and efforts to cattle-oriented activities. The administration associated many problems with courier stocks. For example, the problems of soil erosion and cattle theft resulting from high bride prices, right? Like I explained. They believe it led to cattle theft. Okay. Which really, man, that leads to a robust economy among them, man. If you got a high bride price and an overstock of cattle, right, you're going to have to do more and make more of an effort to get that cattle, which would create a robust economy, man, among the people. So they looking at it like it's a problem, though. Okay? It says the administration associated many problems with courier stocks, for example, the problems of soil erosion and cattle theft resulting from high bride price were both associated with overstocking. Because like I said, if you got a high bride price, that's your big, tall, and wide dam holding back more flood water, which will lead to overstocking cattle, which the water represents that. You know? It says, the British therefore realized that the apocoria had to be transformed in order to achieve development goals both inside and outside the cattle sector. Right? So they wanted to make them into the wage slaves, man. This they did through directly or indirectly induced changes. Directly induced changes comprise actions like the control of cattle numbers, right? How did they do that? With taxation. Like I explained, they put a hut tax on a property that forces them to sell their cattle to meet that tax obligation, man. Right? And monetizing bride prices, like lowering the bride prices. Right? Directly induced changes comprise actions like the control of cattle numbers and their movements. So yeah, their movements as well. So like I'm gonna bring out later, they had set up grazing schemes, man. Okay. It says introduction of grade cattle marketing and combating cattle raiding. Indirectly induced changes were aimed at breaking the hegemonic position of cattle by monetizing the bride price. Okay, so they would reduce bride prices. All right, so that cattle could be obtained and they could pay for the bride easier. You know what I'm saying? It will cost less. Okay, so this all it has led to more cattle raiding, man. It didn't do nothing to help the situation. Right? Didn't do nothing to help the situation. So we got a number of contributing factors to cause the raiding, cause more raiding and worse raiding, cause violent raiding, man. Cattle raiding. It's page 154 in agriculture history. Even so, in September 1946, the chiefs of Buiregi and Nyabasi reported alarming signs of overstocking in their locations. The district administration countered this problem by seeking bride price reduction. You see this? So the way they deal with the overstocking was to lower the bride price, man. So if the bride price is low, the stocks of the cattle can be reduced and dwindled down to a lower amount. Because if you got this high bride price, how are you going to be able to get all of them cattle to get that bride, man? It will be more impossible or more difficult to get all of them cattle so you could get you a bride. This led to overstocking, man. But like I said, that's a robust economy. You got to do more to get your woman, man. That's all. Like the Beer Party song said, you who long for a woman, get more cows, man. Right? Get more cows, man. Raiding was also offered as a means of obtaining bride wealth cattle. This is demonstrated in a popular Beer Party song. You who long for a woman, make more cows. It is women who will remove your desire. So this is how they got down, man. Okay. You want a woman, man, you got to raid, man. You got to raid that cattle. You know what I'm talking about? They don't do chagulaga like Reuben, man. Okay. So it say the district administration countered this problem by seeking bride price reduction. Right? Because it was reported alarming signs of overstock in the location of Buiregi and Nyabasi. Right? Sound like some envy going on right there, man. Right down here say when the increased bride price, the courier men raided their neighbors or bought many cattle to meet the new rises in bride wealth. So you see, you got the cattle raiding and meeting the price obligation to pay for cattle so they can get a bride, man. Okay? Robust economy. See, you know, the British and the Germans come in, make matters worse. Right? Because they sought to make them into wage slaves, man. That's it. That's it. Okay? Making things worse, man. So we see here all these contributing factors, all of these elements brought in to have a mild way of raiding cattle. And now with the presence of the colonists coming in, they basically inflamed the situation among the Most High's people. Simeon and Levi, Abakuria, Masai, Bagasu, right? Kisi, okay? Many tribes of Levi, man. You know what I'm saying? Many tribes of Levi here. Right? Tanzania, Maasai, Chaga, Meru, alright? Kenya, Meru again. Mozambique, Tsonga. I'm gonna bring up Mozambique too, man. Okay? So this agricultural history, page 156. In 1954, the Narak authorities agreed with Kuria chiefs and the inspector of police at Kilgoris that Kuria herders would pay 50 cents per herd whenever they took their animals for grazing in Maasai land. This practice was stopped with the publication of the Penny Report in 1955, by which the government introduced controlled grazing schemes. You see this? Remember I read earlier? They sought to control the movement of the cattle, to break the hegemonic position, break that hegemonic control that the Abakuria and Maasai had over their cattle, man. This is one of the ways that they did it, by bringing in controlled grazing schemes, man. Right? It says in Maasai land and Ikwabi Rikuria near Kehancha. This entailed carving up the grazing land into blocks of various sizes, with strict controls being imposed over herd movement and animal numbers within the block. So you see how this would frustrate the cattle, right? You trying to have your cattle grazed within these small blocks, right? And the cattle are getting irritated. You see how the devil do, man? Frustrating the Most High's people, man. You know what I'm saying? Interfering with how they deal with their cattle, man. They know how they deal with their cattle, man. Why you got to come on along and be a middleman, be the devil the Bible speaks of, and mess around with their way of life, man? Because you wanna make them to wage slaves for free labor, man. You the real squatter. In reality, the Germans and the British were the real squatters, man. Okay? Carving the grazing land up in the blocks, right? It says large tracts of land were also entirely closed off to permit regeneration, because they claimed the overstocking led to soil erosion. So they cut off certain parts of the land so it can regenerate, right? Like why would Esau be concerned with the regeneration of the land? Are they concerned with the land here that they constantly grow and produce their crops and produce on, man? Are they concerned with the pesticides that's being sprayed? The glyphosate, man? Are they concerned with that? And getting that into the food and people eat it and they get into their bodies and all kind of... See, man, come on, man. They weren't concerned with all of that. This is an excuse to make them into wage slaves. That's all. That's it. So the schemes were successful in regulating grazing and controlling stock numbers in the designated areas, though at the cost of increasing the pressure on pastures elsewhere, and they were gradually expanded to Bugumbi and Bukira. The introduction of these grazing schemes, together with the ongoing land consolidation activities, led to some migrant laborers and government workers returning to Bukuria to guard their land. So you see, stuck between a rock and a hard place, man. Either you lose your job or you lose your land. What's it gonna be? What's the choice here? You see this, man? Ooh, come on, man. It says here, those who did not return immediately could lose their land, right? It says this can be illustrated from the case of 3 policemen who worked in Pt.3 River. So at this point, they pretty much becoming, they got these jobs now. They getting jobs now from the so-called white man, right? This can be illustrated from the case of 3 policemen who worked in Pt.3 River and wrote a letter of complaint to the district land board saying, inter alia, I'm going to just read it here. It said, we are working here at Pt.3 River as police officers. When we went home for our annual leave, our cattle did not have enough grazing land because we had been displaced and our land taken. That is why we are applying to be resettled at Kamena and Kenya Manyori location of the Maasai near Chief Getengeni location. Our headman is Chigeri Kehongo. Okay. Hostility intensified between the Abakuria and the Maasai. You see this? This grazing scheme leading to more hostility, man. Right? What the scriptures say, man? Genesis 49. Verse 6, O my soul, come not thou unto their secret and unto their assembly. Mine honor, be not thou united. Man. All right. Hostility in between the 2 brothers, right? The hostility in between the 2 brothers. It says hostility intensified between the Abakuria and the Maasai, and in 1958, the Abakuria raided the Maasai again and took cattle estimated at 850. Right? That ambivalent relationship, that love-hate relationship, man, where you got some cooperation between the 2 for the things that they are dependent on, the iron, the produce, the sorghum, the millet, all of that good stuff, the food, whatever. But the hostility, man, between them causes them to not be united, right? It says this led to the formation of a boundary committee to deal with cattle theft between the Maasai and Kuria locations, man. Right? Yep. You see how this led? All of these things, man. Grazing schemes, taxation, bride price fluctuations, right? The hut tax. All of these things is contributing to more cattle raiding. These squatters, the Germans and the British, came into their land and caused inflation. Right? Causing issues, man. This all leading to violent raiding, man. That's what it's leading up to, man. Right? Alright, so let's continue on. Again, man. Agricultural history, page 174. In 1968, the relationship between the Abakuria and the Maasai became hostile. See, more hostility, man. Just the hostility increasing. This resulted in the closure of the trading centers of Lolgorian, Angada, Baragoi, and Masurura. which had hitherto provided opportunities for cattle trading for both communities. As a consequence of the hostile relationship, prominent cattle traders in Bugumbi and Bukira, namely Wiro, Saboro, Chacha Karada, Simeon Roby, right? See, Simeon, right? And Wita Razimi changed their Maasai trading partners and began selling their cattle in Kisumu. This they did by walking cattle, stopping at Oyugis, Ahero, and Sondu to purchase more cattle from the Luo. All right, Luo was Ephraim. All right, and subsequently selling them at a profit in Kisumu. All right, so the hostilities intensified, right, between the two, Abukuri and Maasai, to where they stopped trading with each other, man. All right. So the relationship between the brothers is breaking off, man. Okay. So yeah, man. You see what led to the transition from non-violent cattle raiding to violent cattle raiding, man. It was that element of colonization, man. During the colonial periods. All right. And I'm gonna deal with the violent cattle raiding. I'm gonna transition. I'm gonna segue into that, man. Most High willing. Okay.